Welcome everybody for joining my session on how Microsoft Teams completes our VDI environments. And like it was introduced already, we're most likely talking about Windows Virtual Desktop today in combination with Microsoft Teams. I'm very happy to present here. Thanks for all the for the community, for everybody who has the time today to attend to my session. First of all, I want to start with a slide about myself that you know who I am. My name is Patrick Köhler. I'm 29 years old, living in Germany, but working for a Luxembourgish MSP called Elgon. We are multiple times country partner of the year. I'm certified in a wide range from the first MCIT Pro Windows 7 to the Microsoft 365 certified enterprise administrator expert. And I'm exactly a technical leader for Azure in my business. I am heavily involved in some communities around Windows Virtual Desktop, especially the international WVD community started by Neil McLaughlin and Stefan Dingemanzel, as well as I started also the German WVD user group, and blogging also on my own, sharing my knowledge around WVD, around Microsoft Teams, which are actually my main topics as you wish. And you can follow me on Twitter or LinkedIn, like you can see it here below. And let's start with the actual topic. Windows Virtual Desktop on Azure. What is this? Windows Virtual Desktop is a service which reached the first anniversary already from the 13th of September this year, and is actually the best-in-class user experience while using the Windows 10 multi-session image, which actually behaves like a normal terminal server operating system or a Windows Server operating system acting as a terminal server, just with a built-in Windows 10 user experience. You can connect from nearly every device. So regardless if you're connecting from a Windows 10 PC, a Linux thin client like the Azure thin clients, or if you just want to connect via your Xbox, all of that is possible from within a browser or any kind of device, whatever you want to use here. It's optimized for the usage of Microsoft 365 apps for enterprise or Office 365 Pro Plus, like I called it here in this slide, as well as it provides a centralized management from within the Azure portal or from within the Azure CLI here, to manage your desktops within here. Customers with existing licenses for Microsoft 365 products, meaning the E3, E5, or Windows 10 E3 or E5 license, are already privileged to use Windows Virtual Desktop at no cost directly. The only thing you need to pay for are the Azure hardware resource costs. You have to simply pay. But now the question, why Windows Virtual Desktop on Azure? Let me give you 3 points exactly what I want to highlight here specifically. First of all is the user experience management, meaning you have one centralized place, which can be the Azure portal here for your end users or your administrators, to administer the complete environment for your end users. The second point is this flexibility, meaning you can decide whether you want to have a single host pool or virtual machines that act like a pool, meaning you can serve multiple users on the same virtual machine, like you have it in standard terminal server environments as well as the access is with synchronized identities to their resources. So you benefit from the security and the identity you have synchronized from your on-premises Active Directory to the cloud to Azure AD. Second point is the VM management itself. So you have a rich partner ecosystem already available that helps you to manage your virtual machines, to manage and patch your virtual machines finally, which is a very important topic while talking about Windows Virtual Desktop or session host deployment finally. And you have disaster recovery implementations and features already built in while using Azure Site Recovery. Something additionally, and this is the third point actually, and it's more Azure specific, like I want to say this, it's the WVD service management itself, meaning you have a simplified and very effective troubleshooting mechanisms already on board while using the diagnostic services of Azure. But there are already very, very rich third-party products like the Nerdio Manager for WVD, for example, that help you to manage your complete environment for Windows Virtual Desktop. But there are also free community tools. I will come to this a little bit later as well, for shadowing the user session, for supporting your users, for enabling Microsoft Teams, etc. So there's already a wide range of tools available on the market that help you build up a very solid environment, VDI environment in the cloud. A question I get often asked is, what kind of operating systems can we use on Azure for the usage of Windows Virtual Desktop? The question is quite simple answered. You can use any server operating system from Windows Server 2012 R2 up to Windows Server 2019, or you have even extended support for Windows 10, but only in a single session mode. And then you can use, of course, the Windows 10 Enterprise single session or the previously announced Enterprise multi-session image, which provides a much richer feature set, especially for the, like the name already says, multi-session usage here. Before we start talking about Microsoft Teams, especially with Windows Virtual Desktop, I want to highlight quickly the Azure ecosystem from a more technical point of view, because I think that it might be very interesting for you to know how is the ecosystem built and where do we need to optimize for Microsoft Teams usage. So after we've covered what WVD actually is, it is very important to understand exactly those underlying components. And this is something I want to show you here. First of all, when we start talking about Azure, that's the first thing. Actually, we need to have a subscription in place to cover the payment for all of our resources on Azure. Second, we need to have a workspace presented. And the workspace is nothing else than what the end user actually sees. Meaning the workspace is every consolidation of desktops or applications we want to grant access to our end users. And how do we control the security behind that? For this reason, we have the application groups underneath. Meaning the workspace is something we present to our end users, but the real security will be provided by the application groups in the background. Meaning this is an object on Azure where we can define groups, security groups, or specifically the users itself to allow or to just grant access to the applications or desktops we want to provide them. But the actual computing power behind that will be stored in so-called host pools. A host pool is nothing else than a logical unit for storing one or multiple session hosts, virtual machines in the end, together in one logical unit. And we can define how users connect to it. What kind of devices will be redirected? What about the security, etc.? And this is something I will show you later on in a practical demonstration as well, what that means, and especially how to install Microsoft Teams on a session host, probably on your next golden image for Windows Virtual Desktop. So to summarize that up, we have the subscription for all the billing, for all the payment we can use in WVD. Then we have the workspace, which is represented to our end users, the application groups that grant access to the resources we provide our end users, and the host pool delivering the logic and a logical unit, including the load balancing, including the RDP settings for our end users, which is providing actually access to the computing power behind. If we extend this ecosystem a little bit, we need to think, of course, about the storage. And when we talk about storage, we have multiple ways of doing this in WVD. But first of all, why storage? Storage can be used for any kind of storing productive data, but it's most likely mentioned here on this slide for storing the user profile. And why this is so important, this is something we have a look at with a very practical tip from my side later on, because we're talking about FSLogix. And what FSLogix is and how it behaves in WVD and what it has to do, especially with Microsoft Teams, this is something I'm going to explain you a few slides later. But to store those profiles, we need to have Azure Files in place. Azure Files on a storage account with Active Directory authentication, for example. Or if we are talking about a more enterprise scale storage, we should probably go for Azure NetApp files. Most of my clients ask me, when do I use which technology here? I always recommend here to go for Azure NetApp files if there's a need of profile storing or general hot data when we reach a point where we have more than 4 TB of storage needs. Otherwise, if we are below that value, you can go for a normal virtual machine, which is acting like a file server, or as it's mentioned here from the ecosystem point of view, Azure Files with AD authentication. But now let us have a look at the management components, like I've mentioned them a little bit earlier. What can we do with the management components and how does it help us to reduce cost in WVD? First of all, we can use a shared image gallery, which is used for the image and update management for our WVD session host. Meaning we can prepare a virtual machine, we can generalize it once our software is installed, our settings are defined. We do a sysprep, generalize it, and store it as an image version in a shared image gallery. This helps us to control a little bit which version is active on our session hosts. We can patch them and roll them out when it's needed to the session host and present them to the users without any kind of service interruption directly. Additionally, and to provide a little bit more automation behind that, we can go for an automation account itself in combination with a Logic app to provide automatic scaling features like automatic downscaling and upscaling when it's needed based on time patterns or on specific hardware patterns, metrics like the CPU utilization. Once it reached a point of just 12% of CPU utilization, it can scale down the session host and scale it up once we reach the point of 40% usage, for example. This is what we can do with the management components if we extend the Azure ecosystem around Windows Virtual Desktop. But now let us take a look of the containerization for collaboration. And what this means, this is what I'm going to explain you right now because it's very important for our session host and very important for the usage of Microsoft Teams and OneDrive for Business. And to do so, I want to introduce you to FSLogix, which is actually a company acquired by Microsoft in November 2018, which is providing a profile solution for Office 365 and user profile containers, as well as Java version containerization. The big advantages with FSLogix and why it's so important in a Windows Virtual Desktop ecosystem is because it provides features which are not allowed or not possible in classical VDI environments, such as Outlook caching, the Windows search support, OneDrive for Business, especially with the Files on Demand feature, native SharePoint support in the Windows Explorer, Office 365 or Microsoft 365 apps for Enterprise, computer activation licensing roaming. So you don't need to redirect any kind of licenses anymore. They can be stored like we were acting in a real local profile. Skype for Business, GAL caching, OneNote caching, and most important point for me is the Microsoft Teams and OneDrive support for Windows Virtual Desktop. How this is working in general, it's quite simply explained. FSLogix comes with an underlying driver technology here, which provides an advanced filtering technology to simply attach the profile to a user session while using a VHD or VHDX virtual hard drive where the user profile is stored in. And this provides, first of all, faster logon times. And on the other hand, it's a more simplified management because it behaves like it's a real local profile. So we don't need to take care of very complicated roaming profiles like we were used to it before. We need to have to do exclusions here and specific policies there. This was yesterday while using FSLogix. Actually, what happens during the attachment process? Like I mentioned earlier, when we're talking about an FSLogix profile about a VHD or VHDX format, which will be simply attached at the user's logon. So no folder redirection required anymore, as everything behaves like a local profile, like I mentioned earlier. And configuration can be done via the registry or via group policy later on. And my advice here is to really use the group policies to be a bit more flexible. And in case that you encounter an issue one day or you want to change the profile folder, meaning the location where your profiles are actually stored, you can simply define this via group policy and update it on the fly. I saw a lot of times that this has been used by a registry, but from my opinion, this is a quite complicated way of doing this. So I highly recommend you to go for a GPO approach here. Another thing, and this is very, very important, and this is something I will show you later on, and this is not somewhere documented yet, from my opinion, but it should. While using Microsoft Teams in Windows Virtual Desktop, and even if it's supporting an supported and working very well, you will have the problem of a very overflooding of your user profile. Because as you know, Microsoft Teams, let's say local user profile nearly explode up to 4 GB. And this is for the first start, actually. So what can we do to prevent this situation and to save storage costs? Actually, there are some exclusions you can also set for your FSLogix profiles. And this is what I'm going to show you in a few slides and in a practical demonstration a bit later as well. What kind of impact it has and what you should take care of from the very beginning before you start using Microsoft Teams in any VDI environment which supports FSLogix, whether we're talking about Citrix, VMware Horizon, or WVD. The second solution I want to present to you is especially the Office 365 profile container. So you can distinguish or segregate or separate both profiles from each other, meaning you have one time the user profile, one time the Office 365 profile container. And like I mentioned earlier, the user profile, of course, stores the local user data, the app data, local as well as roaming. And the Office 365 profile is especially there to offload all Office 365 cache data, meaning everything that is related to OneDrive, Outlook, or any kind of Office application, this can be offloaded from or within this profile. Another thing, like I mentioned earlier, is the roaming of the user license itself, which doesn't need to be redirected somehow. It can be stored directly in the Office 365 profile. Microsoft Teams, OneDrive cache, as well as the Outlook OST support. And there are even automatic mechanisms that allows you to identify if an OST is already present in an existing profile and automatically migrate it to the FSLogix profile solution. How does it look like from the technical or the attachment process? What happens at the user logon? And this is something I can show you on my next slide. Actually, the user logs on to whatever VDI session he wants to start. And exactly at this process, once the user credentials are verified, the VHDX will be automatically attached to the session. And this reduces heavily the logon times. If we're talking from a more practical angle and to give you some examples from my last project, actually the logon time for a standard user profile around 5 to 10 GB takes in the morning at 8 o'clock when multiple users log on around 5 to 10 seconds. This is a realistic value. And this is really a great solution. As you know, sometimes it might be very complicated while using classical roaming profiles here. But now that we covered Windows Virtual Desktop and FSLogix, we should take care of Microsoft Teams. And this is a big challenge and was a big challenge in the past, as you might know, as Microsoft Teams wasn't really supported in VDI environments, especially when we talk about Citrix, which was actually the very first hypervisor or very first VDI solution which supported Microsoft Teams. Nowadays, VMware Horizon is also supporting it, as well as Windows Virtual Desktop, of course. But what do we need to take care about? The big challenges we have here is, first of all, the update management. We need to take care, or we know that Microsoft Teams automatically updates itself. But we need to control this a little bit more because we don't want that applications in our VDI ecosystem start updating themselves. On the other hand, we need to support the operating system. Like I mentioned earlier, officially it was only Citrix. Now it's Windows Virtual Desktop. VMware Horizon is also supported. But we need to take care of the specific support given here. We have the profile flooding, temporary storage capacity, which we need to take care of, as well as the hardware redirection and functionality, which needs to be activated to make hardware like the webcam, microphone, etc. work for our end users. Let us have a look at the client requirements here to operate with Windows Virtual Desktop and Microsoft Teams. When we compare both sides, meaning the requirements for a standalone desktop where you need 2 vCPU, 2 CPU, 4 GB of RAM, and storage from, while we're talking about 8 GB per machine itself, this is quite huge to operate Microsoft Teams. When we have a look on the server side, when we talk also about Windows Virtual Desktop, we need to take care, depending on how many users are working on operating on one virtual machine. If we want to use 4, 6, or 8 vCPU, we should calculate 512 up to 1 GB per user, only for the usage of Microsoft Teams, and 4 GB per user without any optimization. And this is quite huge when you have to imagine that you have to pay per gigabyte for the storage here. But let me show you how you can prevent this. First of all, we need to decide how to install Microsoft Teams. This is mandatory to avoid any complication with the profile flooding, like I mentioned it earlier. First of all, the first option we have is to install Microsoft Teams per machine. This can be done via the MSI exec commandlet while installing the MSI for Microsoft Teams in a per machine mode, which means that you have update management capabilities as you are responsible for the update management on the session house on your golden image. It doesn't flood the profile because the actual Teams data will not be stored in the app data anymore. It will be redirected to the C program files folder on the local hard disk. And it provides, of course, better performance for shared systems, especially when we talk about multiple users connecting from several storage accounts location to the same session host. The other option of installing Microsoft Teams is the most common option, to install it in a per user mode, meaning just doing a double click on the installer and just let the installation run. Of course, it provides a better performance in local environments, but it has the big disadvantage that it will be directly installed into the user's profile. And once you have such a scenario on a VDI environment, you will have a lot of issues. The third option, or another option, would be the Office deployment tool, but you can also go for any kind of deployment tool available on the market, like SCCM Endpoint Manager, Intune, whatever you want to use. This would be the third option you can go for. My recommendation here for VDI environments is clearly the per machine mode. And to do so, we need to take care of a few things, especially when we highlight Windows Virtual Desktop. Like I mentioned earlier, the application, the installer, will be installed locally not in the profile. But to do so, and before running the installer, we need to set a registry key to tell it that we are really running in a virtual environment. This is not required at all for Horizon or for Citrix, but for Windows Virtual Desktop, we need to take care of that. Additionally, we need to install Teams via PowerShell using the MSI exec commandlet /I and all user equals 1 for VDI environments. And last but not least, we need to have our exclusion file to avoid the profile flooding itself. And how such a redirection file looks like, this is a screenshot that presents exactly what kind of folders will be excluded, meaning the service worker, cache, logs, and the media stack will be completely excluded here. And something you should take care of, this is something I'm going to explain a little bit later, is also the WebRTC driver for end-to-end encryption and offloading and rendering on the local cache for really, really good Microsoft Teams performance in a VDI scenario. But let's imagine you have Microsoft Teams already in place and installed it per user. You might see and are aware of the next slide, where I'm going to present you the impact of installing Microsoft Teams the wrong way. If you install Microsoft Teams in a per user mode, meaning with the FSLogix user profile, but without optimization, you can see with my user Scott, who logged on for the very first time, you have a user profile at 4.38 gigabyte, which is immense if you have to imagine that this happens for all of your users. But if you go for the optimizations with the exclusion file, I will also link all of that later on for you, that you can rebuild and have all the information where needed. You can see that the user profile itself will shrink down to a value of around 700 megabyte, which is definitely a huge improvement over the 4 gigabyte you have in a standard per user installation mode. Like I mentioned earlier, you need to enable the hardware support, meaning the redirection of the camera, redirection of the audio capturing devices. This can be done first of all via PowerShell, like you can see it here. And since 2 days, you can also do this via the RDP properties from the Azure portal. I will announce and I will publish a new article today that explains all those specific options in general. And like I mentioned earlier, this is a new feature presented by Microsoft, which helps to improve the performance for Windows Virtual Desktop dramatically in VDI environments. And it's called Audio Video Redirect, AV Redirect. And the key features of that feature you install on WVD on your session host is a high-performance peer-to-peer streaming facilitated by the WebRTC driver, which means that you have a P2P connection which is totally encrypted and which helps overall to improve the Windows 10 performance while offloading all the rendering to the hardware endpoints. And this is actually a great feature for improving the performance in multi-session images. But I think I've talked a lot about the theory. Now you might be curious about the technology itself and how to install Microsoft Teams in a VDI environment. And this is what we are going to cover right now in a small demonstration. And I'm going to switch back to my virtual machine I've prepared for you. You can see it over here. And this virtual machine is actually stored on Microsoft Azure. It can be seen as the future session host. And yeah, let's start with it. The first thing, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, is that we need to set a registry key for our end users or for the session itself. Then when we install Microsoft Teams, that our machine is aware that we're in a multi-session environment. To do so, we need to go to the local machine, software, Microsoft, make a right click, click on new and add a new key called Teams. Once this is done, we need to add just a single entry here. A keyword is WVD environment and give it the value 1. Click OK. And that's everything we need, first of all, for the preparation. A tip from my side, and this is something I've prepared already here, but I will link everything in the text box below after my presentation, and I will share a link from a blog post where you can read everything, how to get started with it, is we need to take care of that some components are installed on our local session host. First of all, we should start with the Visual C++ redistributable and install it on our session host. This is actually a requirement and quite quickly done. The second thing, and mentioned a little bit earlier, for better performance in virtualized environments, we should go for the WebRTC driver, which can be installed and downloaded from the Microsoft web page here as well. This won't work if the Visual C++ is not installed, so make sure you install it upfront. I accept. And that's the trick. And what we're going to do right now is to install Microsoft Teams in the per machine mode. To do so, I'm back here on my golden image. We need to start the PowerShell as an administrator. I navigate to the folder where I have all my files already stored for you. MSI exec/I for install. Microsoft Teams. And define all user equals 1. Like I mentioned a little bit earlier, you have 2 modes of installing it, or 2 parameters. That's what I meant. You have all user and all users. Where's the difference? All user will be used in virtual environments, meaning you install it in a per machine mode. All users, as you see both of them in combination when you read some blog posts, is actually checking if there's a previous version of Microsoft Teams installed. It will be removed and replaced by the new one. Just a tip from my side. As there's no Microsoft Teams currently installed on that host, and we want to make sure that it works in a multi-session environment, all user equals 1 is exactly what we need here. We hit the enter button and wait for the magic to happen. It will take a few seconds. And you can see that Microsoft Teams is about to be installed right now. And that's all. That was actually every step you need to take to make Microsoft Teams available in a per machine mode. And to prove that everything has worked fine, we simply go to the control panel and have a look at what we have installed. First of all, the Visual C++, the WebRTC redirector service, and Teams machine-wide installer. And right now, if we want to prove what I've said earlier, we can navigate to C, Program Files, Microsoft, And you can see the Teams folder being present here instead of being present on the user's local profile. As this is our session host or golden image, we could generalize it and use it in Windows Virtual Desktop. But if you want to prove that the service optimization I was talking about earlier are really working on Microsoft Teams, let me switch over to a real production WVD environment and show you how you can prove for your end users that everything has worked fine with the media optimization. Now we are here in my Windows Virtual Desktop environment. You can see Microsoft Teams automatically started with my end user. And to prove that everything has worked fine, we can simply go on my user profile. I click on my icon over here, go to About, and click on Version. Now you can see that Microsoft Teams has been installed in the proper mode, and you can see WVD Media optimized. And this is actually the proof for local hardware offloading, rendering of the video content in your virtual environment. And that was exactly the trick. And this concludes exactly my demonstration. And if you want to know what you can do to rebuild exactly this structure, what you can do to prevent the issues I was mentioning earlier with the profile flooding, I have written the complete guide how you operate Microsoft Teams on WVD. You can also use this guide for other virtualization vendors, such as VMware or Citrix here, but be aware that the WebRTC driver will only work in a WVD environment. I will link this article a little bit later on and after my site. And if you have any question, feel free to ask it. But if you want to see how it works and want to rebuild it for your environment, especially while building a test environment or a POC, you can use this article, which guides you through all the steps I've mentioned earlier in my demonstration as well. Some recommended resources I can give you for your operation are exactly those for the Microsoft Docs or the Windows Virtual Desktop part, the WVD community where I'm actively involved. And if you have any question furthermore without doing this right now here in the chat, or if you just want to stay in touch with me, you can also do it via that way. You can read my blog post from the link down below, wvdlogix.net, complete guide Teams on WVD, as well as the WebRTC driver. This is what I also linked here as well. Thank you very much for attending to my session today. Very happy to be here. Thanks for the organizers for having me. And thank you especially for attending to my session here. Let's start our cloud journey together. And like I mentioned earlier, I would be happy to stay in touch with you. Thanks a lot.